Okay, so I wanted to go back over a few things that we've talked about in Module 1 and just highlight a few of the fundamental coding concepts that may have gone by a little bit quickly. So if you're new to Python and want a little more experience, take a look here. If you feel like you understood the programming, feel free to go on to the next set whenever they come out. There's a couple things that we did here that are maybe new to you. One is a for loop. So what a for loop does is basically loop over some things. So it starts at one value and then it goes to the next and then the next over a defined period. If it's an undefined period, then you end up with an infinite loop, and that's bad because it'll crash your computer. So let's just do, I have a Scratch piece of code open here. So let's just take a quick look and start to look through this. So the way this is defined in Python is you say for, and then you give some variable, I, and then you say in, and then you give some sort of array or some sort of list or some sort of generator object. And this is going to say basically what is the set of things to loop through. So if we say range 5, basically what that does, let's say print I. I'm going to go ahead and say print range 5 up here so you can see what they look like. So let's run it. What this is going to do, the range, let's make this a list because this is actually a generator object, that range. If we make that range into a list, it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? What we do in the for loop is that we print 0, then we print 1, then we print 2, then we print 3, then we print 4, right? So we just sort of loop through each of those. And we could do various sorts of functions in here. So we could say a equals I plus 2, right? And then we could print A, and then what we would get out would be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? You can see there's lots of different things. And we use this to calculate a protein mass, and basically that we loop through all of the amino acids, right? So we had a sequence, that was A, B, C, D, E, whatever. And you could just say, let's go back and do print I. For I and seek, print I, right? It's just looping through and printing out all those different things. So the generator can be a lot of different things. Another way that you can do this is you can say, you can define it inside of an array or in a list. So you could say A for A in range 5, right? And then if we do print A, it's going to look a lot like that list that we did originally, right? Because basically what we're just saying is the element in the list is going to be A, and the loop is sort of hiding here for A in range 5, right? You could also not use A. You could just say for 2. You would say 2 for A in range 5. And you would see it's just all a list of 2s, but it is the length of range 5 because it is looping through each of those things. So there's a lot of different ways to use for loops. I would say for loops are one of the sort of most core concepts in programming. And this is kind of the two ways to use it in Python, either inside of a list or with this for I in range 5 do something, right? So yeah, I'll get rid of this. But yeah, this for blank in list colon, and then you want to tab everything after it to show that it's inside of the for loop. When you want to get out of it, you just untab, and you could do that. It does hold over variables from the end, but you kind of only want to use the variable I inside of the for loop. Otherwise, it gets really confusing. So this is kind of the way that you would use for loops in Python. Another thing that you can do are if-then statements. So what these are going to use, you're going to say if, and then you're going to have some sort of true-false statement. So you can even do if true, print true. You can then do else is another statement, print false. Basically what else says is that if the statement above it is not true, then do this. So if we go ahead and run this, I'm going to actually just quickly put this in brackets so that we don't have to see it. There we go. All right, if true, print true. If false, if whatever's in there is false, it's going to print false, right? You could put statements in here, test statements. So you could put 1 equals 2. That's clearly false, right? You could say 2 equals 2. That's clearly true. And the reason that this works is that these test conditionals one greater than 2, print 2 greater than or equal to 1, less than or equal to 1, print 2 not equal to 1. Right? All of these things are Boolean operators, right? So what they do is they basically say, they test this and then they return a true false. And so that's why we can say if this, because really what this is saying is this gets reduced to a true false, right? So there's one other thing I'll introduce here, and that's an elif. An elif basically says, let me make this, it's going to be a little bit silly of an example. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of I'll just put those in a thing in case they're useful later. There's lots of different sort of tests like this that print out true false. But basically what this does, it says check the first one. If the first one is true, do this. If it's not, then check the second one. If the second one is true, then do this. And the else at the end says basically if all of the other things have failed, then do this. So that's a way of basically doing a series of tests. And again, these are doing sort of true-false tests. That's the kind of key here. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about is a little more about function. Actually, let me show an example here. Let's put these inside of our function here. So one thing we could do is say if I mod 2 equals 0, what that means is basically that if the remainder of I over 2 is 0, meaning if it's an even number, print even, and then I, else print odd I. So what this loop should do is basically sort our even and odd numbers, right? So it's saying 0 is even, 2 is even, 4 is even, 1 and 3 are odd, right? So this is just a way of basically, you can see we loop through and then we do tests inside, and based on the test, basically whether the remainder of the division with 2 is 0, it's even. If it's not, it's odd. So that's a way of using an if-then statement. The final thing I want to talk about is a little bit more detail in terms of how things get used inside of functions. So we had this function that was saying, let's see, what's a good sort of dummy example? We in the last set of modules, we talked about a function add, right, where we had a and b, and we return a plus b, right? That's a way of basically saying, the def tells us we have a function, add is telling us the name of the function, a is the first variable, b is the second variable, right? And those are required variables. So if we were to say c equals add of 1, right? And if we run this, we're going to get an error. It's saying it's missing the b argument, right? So we have to do 1 and 2, right? And you can see the code is even, the IDE is actually even saying this is a and b. Well, we can also include keyword parameters or optional parameters in there. So one of the things we could do is put in something like subtract. So we could say subtract equals 0 and say minus subtract, right? So what this is basically saying is add a and b and subtract this subtract. Let's just say s to make it simple. Subtract s, right? So then we could put in 3 here and then print c. It should give us 0. Yep. But the nice thing about this is that this s parameter has a default option defined as 0. So if we just leave it out and we say add 1 and 2, we get nothing. Only when we add in this additional parameter of 3 do we get something. Now we could also say s equals 3, which is another way of defining it. And this becomes really useful if you have multiple options. You could say like, so this, what you might say is like m times this divided by d, right? This is a silly example. What we can then do is we can run it like this, where we have the subtraction in, but we could also have this say m equals 2, right? And basically what this is doing is it's activating the multiply, the m, but it's leaving the others 2 as their default. So this is a way that you can basically define different values and put in different things. And this gets really useful as you develop more sophisticated code where you want to put in different variables that you can kind of pass in different ways. I always like to put default variables when I have the option and try and leave things as the minimal that the user needs to provide. But hopefully this gives you some examples of how we can use for loops and if statements and different sorts of ways that we can define functions with default options, with additional options that go in to basically really supercharge your coding. So with that, good luck, and I'll see you in the next module.